What's wrong with Daddy?
He got sick.
First thing I wanted to ask you about is I heard when this was initially pitched to you, you said no. Why did you say no, and what made you change your mind?
Well, it wasn't that I said no because I thought this project's beneath me or it's not a good character. I love the Wolfman and I love all those classic monsters. It was more that I had just done that with the Invisible Man. And so I felt like whenever I've just made a film, it feels like a kind of a skin you want to shake off. Like I've got to pivot into some other genre. But they incepted me as soon as they suggested the Wolfman. I started thinking about what I would do. Jason Blum's very good at this, by the way. He's good at the Jedi mind trick, like making you think it was your idea. So he said to me, well, you don't have to commit to it. Just think about what you would do. And that was it. He got me once again. So then that was it. After that, I went into it.
That's a pretty good tactic. I would believe he's very good at that.
He is.
Big two-part question about going from Invisible Man to this. First, what is something you learned about what it would take to bring a classic universal monster to a modern audience, making Invisible Man that came in handy on Wolfman? But then also, what is a challenge unique to Wolfman that you experienced making this film?
I guess the thing I learned on Invisible Man is that if you just divorce yourself from the law and from the expectations of people and you try to just make a story that is good unto itself, a standalone movie, that's the best, quote unquote fan service you could do. At least that's what I discovered because people seem to be so receptive. I wasn't doing any of the old Invisible Man tropes, the sunglasses and the jacket, but I didn't get penalized for it. People were saying like, oh, we like this take. So I guess that's what I brought into Wolfman is this freedom to be like, just do your version of it. It'll be a version. It'll sit there and then eventually someone's going to make another version, right? I invented all those challenges. I didn't realize, I co-wrote the script with my wife, Corbett. I didn't realize how hard I had made it. Like when I was writing, I wasn't thinking about being on set. There's a child in there who can only act. There is an actor who's got to be in makeup for 6 hours. It's all at night. It's all in one night. Like I put the most amount of challenges in this movie. So I basically tortured myself. I got no one else to blame. There's no screenwriter to blame. It's just me.
If you don't challenge yourself like that, I don't know. Is there a point?
Well, I do agree. I do agree with this. Sometimes you see certain movies and you're like, I think Adam Sandler's got this down to a science where you watch the movie and you're like, this was a vacation that was occasionally interrupted by a film shoot. And I love that. But I do agree with you that I would be suspicious of something that was easy because I've never been involved in a film that turned out well that was easy. It's always this push and this struggle. So even though I was torturing myself, in the end, I was like, well, all right, this is the only way we're going to do something.
So many follow-up questions. The first thing I did want to ask is, can you tell me what is the biggest difference between draft one of this screenplay and the finished film? Because films evolve every single step of the way, and I feel like that's an important thing to spotlight. Yeah,
I mean, the biggest difference is there was, in the first draft, there was more people. There was a community of people that suddenly gathered around to be, it was focusing on the isolated family in the same house, but suddenly there were these other people from the community that got involved. And at some point, Corbett and I were like, oh, we're just not vibing with these other people. And a friend of ours who's a screenwriter, a good friend of ours, was like, I'm just liking the intimate story. Why do you need to involve these other people? So that would be the biggest, I think. In all your work, I always appreciate the character first approach to high concept filmmaking. And in this particular case, narrowing it down to their specific experience was definitely the way to go. One thing I really wanted to ask, and if you want to teeter into spoilers when talking about this, we can raise the warning. But one of my favorite, I guess, challenges that you kind of added to the mix here was the wolf vision that I really liked. Another big two-part question about that. What was it like figuring out the right look for the wolf vision? And then can you maybe also walk us through what you need to do on set in order to complete a shot where you go from human vision to wolf vision and back again? Because my favorite shot of the movie. Oh, that's great. Mine too. Well, first of all, coming up with the look, it was a real process of trial and error because Stefan Duscio, the cinematographer, he and I were talking about different lenses. He actually flew to LA just to test out some infrared cameras. And then they ended up using these cameras on Dune. Do you remember the black and white sequence? Yes. So we were like, oh, they stole our idea, right? And so those were the sorts of cameras. We looked at infrared stuff. We were basically trying to all do it with the camera. And eventually what we landed on was let's just do it in camera with the lights. So when you ask about how difficult it was a little bit of a dance because we're manually moving around the room and then the actors all have these cues to hit, but the gaffer is changing the lights as we go. So it's the type of thing that when you watch it in dailies, you're like, does this work? It takes those layers. Similar thing happened with Invisible Man when you had a guy in a green bodysuit pulling Elizabeth Moss around. It looks ridiculous. It looks ridiculous until it doesn't. And that's usually about right at the end of the process is where it suddenly turns a corner. And that's how I felt with this. Like there was a moment where I was watching that shot, especially when we added the sound design, where I was like, oh, I think we're there, but it took a while.
It's so effective. At this point, I'll officially bring up the spoiler warning because I do have a couple of specific questions I want to ask you. But first, a little bit of a broader one about all the challenging scenes you have in this movie. Of all the scenes, which would you say seemed like the most difficult going into production, and ultimately did it wind up being the toughest to complete, or did a different one catch you by surprise?
Oh, that's interesting. It's always the little ones, like little things. The truck sequence was always going to be tough, but you don't realize that the things you don't realize is like the living element of it. There are actors who have to hang in harnesses, so their discomfort proved to be a challenge of that. But I would say the thing that I didn't think would be difficult that turned out to be very difficult was some of the more intimate emotional scenes, because the actors are really hard on themselves and they don't necessarily want to be told that you have to emote at this exact moment when we hit the lights. That's the last thing an actor wants to be told in my experience. So I had a lot of difficulty that day. I think Julia likes to get herself into a really raw place. It's hard to talk to someone who's worked themselves into that state. So I found that we had to do a lot of takes before we all felt like we were on the same page, And that was just a scene of two people, by each other's side.